All right, everybody, we're going to start and just review what the VB MAPP is and then how the assessment protocol takes place. So just to give everybody an understanding, there's a really great resource and website. I'm going to share the screen and just give you guys access to that website first and foremost. It creates a really neat handout for anybody who is learning how to conduct the VB MAPP and also to understand the purpose and general information. So I provided this last week for a couple of people observing the VB MAPP conducted on a kiddo that we see. And it just breaks down the different parts of a VB MAPP assessment. But just to run and oversee, VB MAPP is a really wonderful assessment. It breaks down language into the components of Skinner's analysis. So you're going to look at tacting, interverbals, manding, independence, social play, and see how that information gives you the best idea of where that learner is in the function of his communication, or her communication. You want to really aim to use this, especially the milestones assessment, somewhere between 0 to 5. It's really meant and broken down into 3 levels. So you have level 1, which is 0 to 18 months. Then you have 18 months to 30 months and 30 months to 48 months. Using it, for example, on a more impacted learner who's 12 or 15 can still render you the right amount of information of where in the functionality of his communication he'll be, but we tend to not give developmental assessments on people when they're older, because then it would say, well, this person only has up to an 18-month-old's function within his tacting or his interverbal skills. So you want to avoid using that with older learners, really stick to having a VB MAPP completed somewhere between the ages of 0 and 5. However, the barriers assessment is something pretty standardly used for every learner, so that there's parts of the assessments that you can pick out that you can really start to adapt depending on the learner you have and how you're completing that assessment. So the VB MAPP protocol in itself consists of 4 different assessments. So you have the milestones assessments that tests and probes different skills. Then you have the barriers assessment that gives you an understanding of how behavior impacts this child's learning, and it breaks down negative and negative behaviors, stereotypical behaviors, automatic behaviors, and different components, and then has you rate them on a scale, on a totality of a scale. Then you have the transition assessment. I haven't conducted that one too much, so I'm gonna gloss over that. And then the task analysis, which gives you a broken down component of probes and skills for levels 1 through 3 that you see in the milestones assessment. So generally the complete assessment is milestones, barriers, and transitions. But many people just do the milestones, then they program off of the task analysis. That's not an assessment portion. It just gives you different areas within one task or one level that the child could complete as a goal or a programming goal. And it is ideal, by the way, when you choose an assessment protocol for you to program off that protocol. The challenge I find with the VB MAPP is developmentally, some things are out of order. So although skills are acquired within that age range, for example, 0 to 18 months or 18 to 30 months, a lot of our children experience what are called splinter skills. So they do some skills earlier than others, and it doesn't quite fill in the skills in a developmentally appropriate way when I think about independent play or even social play. So that is one of the downfalls of VB MAPP, is that when you're programming per the curriculum, you may have things that are developmentally or sequentially out of order, and how to fortify parts of a person's language in order to help the other ones grow. For example, you need a child that learns to label or have high echoics in order to get better at interverbals. But then you have children who can do high echoics, but they have low mands. So you have to really use your discretion and judgment to see how you can improve the quality of life of that child. And that's why it's so individualistic how a child's programming sequence occurs. So moving forward, it just tells you a couple of really valuable tips. So when you're completing a VB MAPP, you always want to do a pre-scoring. So if this is for a learner you've had already on your case for a good bit, you can also complete a pre-scoring based on parental report. I tend to stay away from that because there are many times that a child can perform a skill with a parent and they can't with you. So then you may still have to teach to generalize the skill. But if you're able to do a pre-scoring, is basically you look at the milestones and you have to be either sure that the child can do the skill or absolutely sure that they cannot do a skill. If they cannot do the skill, sometimes I'll still try and I'll probe it just to make sure that it's not my bias or the lack of assessing a skill that is the reason that a child can't complete a skill. It's really important that you also keep the guide as a reference because you're not going to really be fluid with the assessment in the beginning until you run quite a few of them. So the other big piece that this also teaches you is once you're using each of the assessments, how to go through it. So for each skill, there's 5 separate milestones within each level. So then you have level 1, level 2, level 3. So then you're looking for, example, this gives you the man section, whether a child can complete what is asked of them within each section. The VB MAPP also gives you the flexibility that the learner can be using PECs, signs, words approximations, and also included in that would be an AAC device, if that's your learner. AAC devices at that time weren't so popular, so that's the reason why it's not really included within the actual assessment. But when I went to a Sundberg presentation, he also did include that, yes, absolutely. If a child is using functional communication through a device, then you can absolutely score it just as you would with words. So one of the big things is when you assess a child and you're using the electronic version of the VB MAPP, you want to designate a color for every assessment. So if I use yellow today, which is 12, 20, 20, then within 6 months, I want to use maybe red or green. So then I can actually see the growth of a child over the progression of time. And remember to fill in from the bottom to the top. So
I have a question. What is those little circles under? I was always curious about it. And
perfect. Great question. So those circles here would be, if a child can't even complete up to that level 1, you would fill in that circle. So then the first assessment is the first circle, and then the 4th assessment would be the 4th circle. So let's say a child can complete level 1 to 5 in level 1, but hasn't gotten to level 2. I would fill in this little circle when I assess them the second time. So it's to say we assessed for skill in the level 2 or level 1 and we didn't see the skill. So it's to indicate to the absence of the skill.
So basically, so first time, for example, if you're assessing the kids the first time and it will be no yellow slots, so you would put the yellow one, the first circle. That's why it means didn't. And if it would keep the same during the second assessment, you would color, for example, green the second one.
You got it. Okay. So then you would do that in a series of completions. Hopefully you're not going to have 4 of them all in the same slot, but you may. And that's why it's important to kind of understand and know that. So the EESA, so the echoic, just so you guys know, is one of the sections you test for, has its own subset sheet, and it's really modeled beautifully according to how sounds and language is acquired in the English language. I learned that, unfortunately, in Honduras, because children who speak another language acquire other sounds a bit earlier. So M and B, P tend to be pretty universal. So that's why you'll hear a lot of, in a lot of cultures, people will say either baba, papa, mama, because those are some of the early initial sounds. Everything else comes different depending the language. But since we're sticking to English, which is a really great one, the EESA requests that you actually ask the learner to repeat after you, and it gives you a series of phrases. Of that could be C words, D words, bop, pop, ouch, just to kind of see their ability to have that vocal repertoire and how far along they are in that in terms of filling in for language communication. So here's some examples. So group 1, you have to really master those B, P, M, you see, N, H, W sounds before you really start to move on to K, G's. There's a specific word for it that I cannot recall. Those are sounds that occur in the back of the throat that are a little bit more difficult versus the front. I know BPM are called bilabial sounds. This is where I need Krista, my super good friend who's a SLP. She knows all the locations and sounds of the locations of the words. And then this goes over a little bit what is in the barriers assessment. So just understanding if a child, and it gives you very specific criterion on where to grade it. If it's a first evaluation, you really want to conduct this alongside the parent. And then I would still say you want to conduct it with the parent, because you're not just measuring how the child is doing in one setting, but you really want to get an idea of how is that behavior occurring across settings. And then you tend to score it based on in the most difficult setting. So if the child, for example, has no behaviors in schools, but has a lot of negative behaviors at home, then you would rank it to where it is the most negative. So if it would be, for example, a number 1 at school, but it's a number 3 at home, then you would mark it a 3. And then you would fill it in on the graph the same. And almost everyone I know does an electronic VB map because they've done such a good job at like translating this to Excel that it's really nice to keep track of it that way. By the way, before I move on to the barriers, let me just say, just as in the barriers, in the milestones, when you start filling in the scoring, you're going to add the scoring additionally. So if you get a number 3 here and a number 2, the total would be a 5. You always want your milestone score to be higher, right? You want to look for a higher number versus a lower number because that means your child is acquiring skills. Now, in the barriers, you want to see the opposite. You want to see that number go down over time because there should be a significant reduction in maladaptive behavior that we're addressing in order to increase learning. So the higher the barriers number, the more barriers there are in that child's way to really acquire skills and language needed in order to have the best function and quality of life. Now, the barriers assessment doesn't do half points, so you can only just score it 0 through 4. The milestones will do half points, just as the EESA will also do half points, just so you guys are aware. So you may see a score of 70.5 for milestones. That's totally normal. But the barriers, never 70.5, only 70 or 71. Okay. Does anyone have any questions?
No.
Okay, great. Just so you guys are aware, within the transitions assessment, you will start reading through the criteria, and then it gives you a better idea of what scores and programs you really should work on to make sure that you're including a child's maladaptive behavior within their skill acquisition. So it gives you, it's the same exact format of a barriers. You can't have half points. It's either 0 through 4. And it gives you an idea of really where do you need to focus on within the next 6-month planning period. So if a child has a lot of spontaneous behaviors, which is great, and self-directed leisure time, let's say right now their self-directed leisure time is pretty low. You want that increased. So you really want to work on maybe functional play skills for this kiddo. That gives you a much better niche and idea, along with having like a lower play score within the milestones. So it just gives you a more refined understanding of where exactly to program for that child. And then you have the last assessment, which is just a complement for you to understand. If you have ever seen this on Catalyst, for example, you'll see some kids have like 1B, moves closer to la la la. That comes from the VB MAPP TA list. So this person is working on a very broken down manner of how do I acquire skill number 1? Well, I need to do 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D. So this is great for our more impacted learners, especially, so you can break down a skill and then make a goal a skill. And then you can really work towards that. So obviously before a child's able to emit 2 words, they need to be able to make eye contact. They need to be able to gain access to have a reinforcing item. You have some kids who don't even have things that are reinforcing for them. You have to work on the reinforcer bank. You have to be able to respond to your name in many ways. You have to be able to point, to indicate what are your needs and wants. Most learners I have seen will indicate that they want something. It tends to be a more out of the norm that you have children who don't have any reinforcers at all. And if that's your case, and you always want to start at your primaries, right? We all need food, water, temperature. Start there to then see, if you can help a child acquire secondary reinforcers to make the reinforcer bank a bit more plentiful. Okay. Any questions on any of the 3 above?
Good so far. No.
Okay, great. So then I wanted to give you guys just a broader understanding. When you're using, the best way to really understand and see a VB map is having to conduct it alongside with someone. The first time with any assessment, I would say it's really great that you pair up with an analyst. The VB map tends to be very much a gold standard within ABA to use. So this is definitely one of the assessments I would have very high proficiency in how to conduct, to report, to score, and do all of the above with. So since most of the clients that we're tending to get are generally early learners, this is a really good basic foundation of an assessment. So you can start off with really conducting a VB map, understanding where is a family having challenges with their child, where is a school having challenges with their student, what deficits are there that make accessing maladaptive behavior more reinforcing than a skill acquisition for some specific reason. So you want to make sure you really get a good understanding of that before you even get ready to program. You can't just look at a child and say like, oh, he doesn't talk. Well, there might be a reason he's not talking. Well, let's figure out what that is. And the reason isn't, because sometimes it becomes circular. Oh, he doesn't talk because he has autism. Well, no, he doesn't just talk because he has autism. There's plenty of people with autism that speak. We need to make sure what is the maintaining contingency and reinforcer within that environment that maintains, for example, crying as the valid form of communication versus speaking. And so the VB map helps break down simple goals in that way, in that sense. So you want to make sure first and foremost, you're using this on an age appropriate learner. It's really designed for an early learner, not for a later learner, the milestones in specific. And you can, and I've seen people do it all the time, choose different assessments to complete with a different child. So you may have a learner who really needs an AFLs and maybe a VB map barriers. That would be a perfect combination for them. Or you just want to do a milestones right now, not a barriers, because you don't feel like you have an accurate understanding of the barriers. I would still say at that point, rely on the parent and caregiver report, and you can just write that in within your treatment plan. Let me pull up, just give me a second. I'm going to pause the recording and then pull up a VB map and make sure all the HIPAA information is removed. Awesome. So I'm going to show you guys what an actual VB map scoring electronic looks like. So let me just share my screen. So here we have a standardized Excel VB map scoring sheet. The first sheet I'm going to show you guys is the milestone sheet. So where the child's name is, you would just write in, for example, John Doe, and you're going to use that. You really want your electronic testing sheet to build upon each other. So you really don't want to use a separate Excel for the second assessment and then the third. You want to really fill these in from assessment 1 to 4 so that you see the progress of a child's learner. I'm showing you guys a first-time assessment because that's the easiest to understand. If we get a good understanding of this, I'll show you a second scoring sheet of a child who's had multiple VB maps conducted on them. You would also put the child's date of birth there, or the learner's date of birth. And then you want the exact age of testing. So generally you're okay with just doing years and month. So if a child is 4 years and 3 months, you put 4 years and 3 months, and the second time would be maybe 4 years and 10 months. So you get an idea of where a child is in comparison to what level they're functioning at. And then you see,
I have a question. It's like, it's very like slow. Like I just like was thinking about like, so when we're reviewing, breaking up the skills, so for example, the first math and like AA, 1A, 1B, 1C.
Yeah.
So for example, if the child gains all of these 5 sub-skills, does it automatically mean he mastered the first one? Or it's still, he still maybe not getting it, even though he has all of this like pre-skills? You know what I mean? So like,
yes,
like it's
so
kind of consists of it, or it's like a plus to get it?
Yeah, so if a child gains the pre-skills, but yet can't meet, if they would gain most of the pre-skills, then more than likely they'd have at least half a point. For example, for number 1, they need to admit 2 mans in order to have a score of 1. But if they admit 1 man, then they would have that. Within the transitions, I believe, oh, this is just the scoring of the transitions. Let me see if I find the tracking. Oh no, it has to be in the actual manual. I believe that one of the last subsets of goals is learning to man at least one thing. So pointing or gesturing to one thing. That would be like 1-4. I'm sorry, 1D. 1D. So you would get,
on tracking level 1, you track this like sub skills, right?
Correct.
Like,
but in the assessment portion versus in the programming portion, it's different. The programming portion, for the most part, is based off of the assessment criterion. So if the assessment criterion is that emits at least one MAND, within the subsets of 1, so 1A, 1B, 1D, 1C, so 1D would be points or gestures to things that are reinforcing for him. So then he would have at least half a point if he's able to complete 1D. Does that make sense? So I don't see a child meeting the broken down steps to a specific criterion without at least gaining half a point. Not if he gained all of the baby steps.
Okay, I see.
Yeah,
makes sense. Like maybe it's like this is more like basic ones, but maybe there is some more advanced, for example, in level 3, where like it will be not as obvious as it would be like for like MAND level 1, you know?
Correct. For reading and writing, for example, you have here kids they can read their own name, but then necessarily match certain things. So, or you have kids who can match, but they can't read their own name. So you can work on multiple baby steps and program from multiple numbers at the same time. So that's not a difficulty. But like writing is a very building skill. So if you can't, for example, if you can't color, you can't trace. If you can't trace, you can't copy. If you can't copy, you can't write. Those are things that really go in succession. Daily living skills are generally that way too. But at times you do have people who have splinter skills with those things. But it tends to be more rare than with communication, with the verbal behavior, with the verbal behaviors. So you have kids, for example, who can label tons of things, but they have poor listener skills and really poor intraverbal skills. That's totally possible. With motor development, that tends to be not usually the case. Okay, so within each of the Excel sheets, you have the ability to do up to 4 tests. So this is the first test. You fill in the date. You always put the initials of who's the tester. And then here I've designated the color yellow. I don't know why I like to start with yellow. It's completely up to you. I just like starting with yellow. This seems worse than, I used to do like green, yellow, red, but then it looked like a traffic light. So I didn't really like to do that. So now I always just start with yellow. It's a preference thing. You can pick whatever color you want. And then I completed some of the pre-scoring for this learner, for example, that he was able to get to, within pre-scoring, he did about to, I think, a level 3. Then I probed skill 4 and 5, and then I figured out here, Maria, he couldn't actually get to number 6 here within level 2. So then I filled in right over here that first bubble because it's the first assessment, that he got up to a number 5, but he couldn't go beyond that. Okay, and then same thing with the tacting. He's unable to label at this point in time, so I just filled it in that he didn't even have he wasn't able to even make a score of 1. And then I filled in each of the corresponding areas. I do want you guys to just take a focus on this area right here. It is totally possible that you have a child who's not able to do one of the skills, but's able to do the other. So let's say I pre-scored number 2 and then he can't do number 3. It is my duty to continue to go to see if he is able to do number 4, 5, and 6, at least, to probe the next 3 skills or 3 points, because it could be the case that this child is experiencing splinter skills. So if that occurs, then you would not score them up to a 4. This is 2 points, then this would be 1 point. So this child has a total point in the VB MTS of 3. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Cool. So this is a milestones. And then when you're writing part of your treatment plan, you're going to say that this child completed skills up to level 1. You need to then program within level 1 before getting to level 2. Now you may have some skills that are in level 2 and 3, then you can program from both. But if the child hasn't even made it all the way in these areas to level 1, you really want to stick to that area of programming. So let's head into the barriers. I just did part of this child's barriers, just so you know. It's an ongoing case right now. This is the assessment season for me, so I'm still completing parts of the assessment. So according to the guide and the manual, I look at the different requirements of where this child would score for behavior problems, instructional control, a defective MAND, a defective task, a COIC, etc. And then I filled in either 0 to 4. If it's 0, you just leave it blank. Obviously, then you fill in the corresponding numbers, and then you would add all the additional numbers that you have here, and then you'd place your score right here. And so you can land anywhere from either 0 to 96. So this can go anywhere from a 0 to a 96. And then based on that, you can pretty much understand how much support you're needing to write in behavioral goals. Okay? And to take better understanding and traction of the child's rate of maladaptive behavior. I really love this barriers assessment, and I tend to use it for all my learners because I think it does a really beautiful job of breaking down the deficits in different areas of communication. So I have kids who have pretty great interverbal skills, horrendous listener skills, right? Don't want to follow directions, have a lot of non-compliance. That tends to be one of their deficits. Another thing that it tends to assess that other evaluations and assessments don't do is prompt dependency. That's a really big problem with a lot of learners, especially as they get older. So understanding how much of prompt dependency is this person needing to even just complete their daily functions. And it breaks down having defective scanning and self-stimulatory behavior versus hyperactive versus sensory defensiveness. I think they're very different barriers to learning, but it's really great that this gets a bit more precise in where is that area of difficulty. So you can have a child who has a hard time sitting in a chair but doesn't really experience a lot of self-stimulatory behavior, or experiences all three. So it gives you a better idea of how to explain the barriers to learning to the reviewer when you're on an insurance call. And then guys, just to give you an understanding, the transitions work just similarly to a barriers. I tend not to do this so much, but it also gives you an understanding of how to score from 0 to 5, usually it's only to 4, of where this child is in every specific area. And then here are the broken down lists. So for example, level 1, here, Maria, you were saying like, if it's always 1 M because that means the point 1 is met. That's why you always see it as an M. And those are the different sub skills that go under. So you would start at programming at 1A, then move to 1B, 1D, 1C, 1D, et cetera, until you get all the way up to.
So you more focus on 1A, 1B, 1C versus you just put, for example, 1, just like program is the way it says in just the regular
Correct.
one.
You are not supposed to program it the way that it's just met. You can write an overall goal for 6 months saying this child will omit 2 MANs, but the way you would program it is in subsets of goals. So by saying first this child will point to something, then they will select this, then they'll use this gesture to do this. So
or it also depends on the learner if like it's highly impacted. So then you would rather break up the skills into like small goals versus like it's a the client who gets like goals pretty quick. So you wouldn't need to do this sub goals. You would just do like 20, 30, 40 tasks and like whatever.
Exactly. So if you see that your client has a very high rate of acquisition, which somewhat happened with one of our clients, then you would program according to that person's rate of acquisition. Then you also have here the sub level 2, and then you also have level 3. Perfect. Alrighty, friends. Any questions?
I don't have a question about VB MAPP.
Perfect, no problem. I would say this is one of the more clear-cut assessments to conduct. And the nice thing is, and I would always recommend, guys, make sure you do 3 things before you even starting to write a treatment plan. Number 1, you need to make sure you attain your background information up to date. What does that mean? Check in with mom and dad if the child's receiving any new medication, to what dosage, has there been new allergies, new diet changes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Number 2, you really should take a peek at their data if they're an existing client, obviously. If they're a new client, you can skip this stuff. But take a look at their existing data and goals, see where they're progressing, where they're having difficulty. This obviously should be an ongoing, oh boy, I just went blank. An ongoing task.
Monitoring.
Yeah, you should have ongoing monitoring. That's part of your job as being an analyst, and that should be conducted from the time that that person becomes your client to the time that they transition out of being your client. So you should always have ongoing monitoring going on. That usually is done through supervision and or parent training or direct services. It just depends on the learner's packages.
Would you do this, for example, if obviously you do the continuously monitor the situation, would you rather be like kind of filling the assessment as long as it goes, or you just go sit and everything at once? Or you just, because like it just takes time, so you not forget, oh, like he masters this, so you just fill then, oh, you're not supposed to do that, versus you sit.
So you can do the assessment ongoing, that's never an issue, but to do a formalized assessment, you actually have to wait a month before the person's treatment plan is due. In a perfect world where everyone is self-pay and I'm just worried about how to effectively do this, I generally tend to do this on a 6-month or a year model, and I fill it in as I go in. But for insurance purposes, you really are only allowed to conduct an assessment 1 month before a child's treatment plan is due. So if it's due January 15th, you can only start that December 15th. You can fill it in beforehand of the skills that you're sure of or that they go mastering, but you need to do a full probe within that last month. So you conduct that full assessment. Does that make sense? And that's for every assessment, not just the VB MAPP, but like the ABLES and the AFLs make it really conducive for you to go filling it in. But you would put that date that you finish probing and completing all those skills a month before that child's treatment plan is due.
So basically you can kind of make up but not make up the dates, because like how many goals is like ABLES, like 500, like more? It's like it's insane.
Plus goals. Yeah, but you're if you have a learner that meets all those goals, I'm not quite sure they should be having ABA services. Most people tend to complete about 100 of the goals. I would say somewhere between 100 and 200 of the goals, and they go. You get a good idea within the first assessment how many goals that person has, and then as they go filling them in, filling in the chart is really easy. It's much more probing the skills. I think the ABLES make it more conducive for you to probe that skill throughout and then have data backing up those points than VB MAPP. VB MAPP has a lot less skills you have to probe, which is great as an evaluator.
But VB MAPP also covers much less areas.
Correct, and not with as much specificity as an AFLs or an ABLES. Because even when you start getting up to the AFLs level, it depends which curriculum you're using, right? I have kids who are using AFLs school or AFLs home, AFLs basic, so then I would have to fill in 3 assessments, not 1. So that's where that also makes it challenging.
Also, like, I think I asked the question before, but I always, I don't know, tend to forget or something. The thing is with assessment versus curriculum, because sometimes we doing an assessment and submit into insurance, but I see a lot of BCBA tend to take goals like from different, for example, this kid has VB MAPP assessment for insurance, but I see a lot of ABLES goals in the programs. And so how does it look like? Should you at this point complete ABLES, or should you do VB MAPP? How can you, for example, some ABLES, for example, some ABLES goals, I don't know, like some grooming, dressing skills, whatever doesn't exist in VB MAPP. So how would you explain it to insurance? Do you need to complete the 2 assessments then? And like, where can you understand, okay, I need to switch to the different one, and you just drop the VB MAPP, or like what's going on?
In a perfect world, every curriculum you use to program with, you should complete that evaluation. So if you use, for example, VB MAPP and AFLs and ABLES, then all 3 should be completed for your insurance review. And if you get a very skilled reviewer, they're going to look for that. It's not marked as inefficient if you don't have this, if you don't have the 3. So you can say, hey, I just conducted this evaluation because that's what was allotted within the hours that I was able to bill. But then they would recommend, hey, for the next review, I want to see all 3 filled in. It's fine. You can program for however you feel it's fit for the child. That's totally okay. I need to have some objective form of measuring the child's progress. And if you're only showing me one curriculum that's only a third of their programming, then I'm not able to really do that. So hypothetically, you should have all 3 conducted and finished.
So where does, I understand, for example, if you can take one goal from ABLES, they wouldn't say. So where does it comes, what percentage, like approximate of goals it has to be?
I would tell you if you at least have a quarter, because I have some skills, for example, from the Essentials for Living, but it doesn't tend to be more than 10% of my goals come from Essentials for Living. So I would say if you have at least a quarter, you should do that evaluation. Or what some people do, and I've done this before, is I go rotating the assessments. So I've had children, for example, that at the 6-month mark, I'll do VB MAPPs, and then I won't do a VB MAPP for another year, because then at the year mark, I'll do the ABLES. So then I have both assessments going on, but they go on a yearly basis, and that's totally acceptable too. That's another way you can somewhat do that.
I didn't get it. So how do you do that? It's like,
so like let's say you have 2 treatment plans a year, right?
Yes.
For the first treatment plan of the year, I'll use a VB MAPP evaluation. For the second one, I will use an ABLES. So that
and then it's again VB MAPP ABLES, VB MAPP
exactly.
ABLES.
VB MAPP ABLES, VB MAPP ABLES, VB MAPP ABLES until I switch curriculums. And then every year they have it filled in. I've done it on a rotating system like that before, and that was fine. Because to really conduct 3 evaluations takes a long time. A very, very long time.
It is. Like, I mean,
I only have generally 6 to 8 hours to complete an evaluation. And of that, I have to probably allot 3 to 4 hours to completing the data review, attaching graphs, rewriting social history, all of that. So doing the writing portion of it, that I only really have 2 to 4 hours to conduct the actual evaluation portion of it.
I think it will take forever for me to complete this for the first time. It's like 1 week, like.
Yeah. No, the first time in hours, it usually takes you somewhere between 10 and 12. I think Jess had it on the harder marker. I think it took her about 20 hours because she had to do a Magellan review, which is the hardest one to do out of all. But yeah, I would say you allot a week at least to write a treatment plan. And then you get to a point where you're like me, that you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 due in a matter of 3 weeks. Then you just have to go back to back to back to back to back. So this is heavy season for me, which is why, Jesse, when you're asking, I'm off the 24th, but I wake up early on the 24th to do paperwork. Because if I'm not able to do that, then I can't function and flow. And I always tell families, you really need to respect the time I'm doing your treatment plan, because if I don't get this right, literally your entire my ability to provide care hinges on this. And once you start going down in hours, or if I have to, for example, go into appeal, which a lot of my clients, just for some sort of reason, end up going into appeal, then I need to also allot time for that, because it's very important that I maintain the quality of care that I need for each client. So they all have no problem saying like, hey, I can't see you this week. And I like that it lands around the holidays, because a lot of people take time off anyway. And I'm able to do that with a lot less stress, instead of just, but if I have to skip, for example, a supervision session because I'm writing a treatment plan, that's the way it is. I have to do that, because it's more important to miss one. It's less important for me to miss one supervision versus not write an effective treatment plan. And there are only 24 hours in a day. So I have to do that with only 24 hours in a day. Okay. Alrighty, everybody. I think we covered the VB MAPP pretty well. I will aim to do the ABLES on, let me give everyone the date. The 3rd. So right when we're starting back up for the new year. But let me stop the recording.